In today's Reddit story, "You're just a wallet," my stepdaughter laughed, mocking me for thinking I was family. "My real dad is better than you." I just nodded and stopped paying. The day she had to call her deadbeat dad for rent money, she ended up crying and begging me instead. I never expected my stepdaughter to see me as her real father. I knew from the beginning that I was stepping into a complicated situation when I married my wife, Julia. She had a daughter, Ava, from her previous relationship, and I was more than willing to love and support them both. I was ready for the usual growing pains of blended families. The awkwardness, the slow trust building, the hesitation, but what I wasn't ready for: being treated like a walking ATM. From the moment Julia and I got serious, I made it very clear that I wasn't just marrying her. I was committing to Ava too. I paid for her school tuition. I took her to sports practice. I taught her how to drive. I saved up to help her with college. I was at every recital, game, and event. Her real dad? Not a single birthday card. Not a single call on Christmas. Not a dime in child support. Yet despite me being the one who was always there, Ava idolized him. I told myself it was just a kid's blind love for a parent, that maybe one day she'd see who truly cared for her. But as the years went by, things only got worse. Ava never missed a chance to remind me that I wasn't her real dad. If I asked her to do chores, "You're not my dad, don't tell me what to do." If I tried to give her advice, "I'll ask my real dad instead." If I told her she couldn't do something, she'd run to Julia, who would immediately defend her. "She's just being a teenager, honey. Don't take it personally, she's still adjusting. It's just a phase, she'll grow out of it." Years passed. Ava never grew out of it. And Julia, she always had an excuse. One night, I tried to have a serious conversation with Julia. "She treats me like a stranger, Julia. I've done everything for her, and she still refuses to acknowledge me as a father figure." Julia sighed. "She doesn't mean it, Will. She's just struggling with identity issues. Her real dad wasn't there for her, and that left a wound." That word stuck with me. Real. I took a deep breath. I get that. But I can't keep giving my all when I get nothing in return. It's exhausting. Julia frowned. "She loves you, in her own way." I looked at her carefully. "Are you sure?" Julia hesitated, for the first time, and that's when a terrible thought hit me. What if she married me, not because she loved me, but because she needed someone to provide for her and Ava? It was a thought I had never allowed myself to consider before, but that night, I couldn't shake it. It happened on a random afternoon. I had just come home from work early and was passing by Ava's room when I heard her laughing with her friends, and then I heard something that made my stomach drop. "No, he's not my real dad. He's just a wallet." Silence. Then another voice, one of her friends, giggled. "Damn, girl." Ava continued, completely unaware that I was standing just outside the door. "I don't even know why he tries so hard. My real dad is so much cooler. Once I move out, I'm never talking to him again." Laughter. Cold, cruel laughter. I felt physically sick. I walked away. Not because I didn't want to confront her. Oh, I did. But because I suddenly realized, what would be the point? I had spent years sacrificing, supporting, loving this girl. And to her, I was nothing but a paycheck. I walked straight to the kitchen where Julia was washing dishes. "I just heard Ava call me just a wallet to her friends," I said, my voice eerily calm. Julia turned around, startled. "What? No, she wouldn't." She did. For the first time in my life, I saw guilt flash across Julia's face. She opened her mouth, probably to offer another one of her justifications. But I was done. "I've taken care of her for years, Julia, and she's already planning to cut me off the moment she doesn't need me anymore." Julia looked away. That hesitation again. "She's just a kid." I stared at her. "You really think that's an excuse?" She didn't answer. I don't know what was worse, the fact that Ava said it, or the fact that Julia didn't fight back when I told her. That silence from my wife? That was my answer. She knew Ava saw me as nothing but a bank account, and instead of correcting it, she let it happen. That was when I realized something that made my stomach turn. Maybe Ava wasn't the only one who saw me as just a wallet. Looking back, I started noticing all the little red flags I had ignored over the years. Julia always encouraged me to pay for everything, but when I asked if Ava should get a part-time job, she would shut it down. Whenever I tried to set financial boundaries, Julia would guilt-trip me. She never once tried to discipline Ava for her ungratefulness. She always acted like things would get better, but never made an effort to change them. And the worst part? I realized I didn't know if Julia would have ever married me if I wasn't financially stable. That thought made my chest tighten. Because what if I was just an investment? After that day, I stopped going out of my way for Ava. I wasn't cruel, I just stopped trying to win her over. But Ava? She didn't even notice. She kept spending my money like it was infinite. She started asking for bigger allowances. She wanted a new car because her old one was embarrassing. She started browsing expensive colleges without a care in the world. And when I suggested she apply for scholarships or get a part-time job, she laughed. Why would I do that? That's what you're for. Julia, who was sitting beside her at the dinner table, just sighed. Ava, be nice. Not Ava, that's unacceptable. Not Ava, apologize. Just be nice. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just Ava's fault. Julia let this happen, and if I stayed quiet, it would never stop. That night, I sat Julia down. You need to stop enabling this. Julia frowned. Will, I told you, she's just immature. I shook my head. No, she's entitled. There's a difference. Julia sighed. What do you want me to do? She's a teenager. She's figuring herself out. I gave her a hard look. No, she's already figured it out. She knows exactly what she's doing. Julia bit her lip. You're making too big of a deal out of this. I clenched my jaw. Am I? Then tell me this. If I lost my job tomorrow and couldn't provide for you and Ava, would you still be here? Silence. A long, guilt-ridden silence. She opened her mouth, then closed it. And I knew. She couldn't even lie to me. After that, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to argue. I was simply going to give her exactly what she wanted. She said I was just a wallet? Fine. Then I'd close the damn wallet and let her see how much her real dad cared about her when I was gone. That night, after my argument with Julia, I made the final decision. No more discussions. No more excuses. No more being treated like an ATM. Ava thought I was just a wallet? Fine. Wallet's closed. At first, Ava didn't even notice. She still went out with her friends like nothing had changed. She still swiped the credit card I had given her. She still thought she had control. Then, one afternoon, the first crack appeared. She stormed into the living room, face red with fury. Well, my card got declined. Fix it. I didn't even look up from my laptop. No. She blinked. What? I finally turned to her, calm as ever. I canceled it. She stared at me, processing. Then she lost it, screaming about how unfair I was, calling me selfish and controlling, accusing me of ruining her life. Julia ran in, alarmed. What's going on? Ava spun around, jabbing a finger toward me. He canceled my card. Julia's eyes widened, then she turned to me, confused. Will, why would you do that? I met her gaze, unblinking. Because Ava made it clear I'm just a wallet, so I decided to act like one. And wallets don't open themselves. Silence. Julia shifted uncomfortably. Ava clenched her fists. I don't need you. My real dad will help me. I smirked. Good, call him. For the next few days, Ava was in full denial. She strutted around the house like nothing was wrong. She told her friends it was just a misunderstanding. She was so sure her biological dad would step up. Then came the phone call. I was in the kitchen when she called him. Dad, I need help with rent. Pause. Then I heard his lazy, dismissive voice through the phone. Rent? Kid, I barely got money for myself. Ava stiffened. Wait, what? Her hands shook. But you said you'd always be there for me. And then, he laughed. I was just saying that. You didn't actually believe it, did you? Ava turned pale. You don't mean that. Listen, kid, I don't got time for this. Ask your stepdad. That's his job, ain't it? And just like that, he hung up. Ava sat there staring at her phone like it had just betrayed her. Her biological dad had abandoned her. Her credit card was gone. Her friends who once loved shopping with her stopped answering her texts. Her perfect little bubble had burst. I walked past the kitchen and saw her still gripping the phone, eyes wide with shock. She was finally realizing the truth. And for the first time in her entire life, she had no one left to save her. Ava had spent years living in a fantasy. She thought she could treat me like garbage and still get everything she wanted. She thought her biological father was her safety net. She thought her mother would always defend her. Now, that fantasy was crumbling. And soon, even Julia, her biggest defender, was about to realize just how badly she had failed her. After her dad hung up, Ava just sat there, not moving, not speaking, just staring at the phone like she was waiting for it to ring again. It didn't. Then, without a word, she got up and stormed off to her room. I expected her to start another tantrum, another outburst. Instead, for the first time, there was just silence. And Julia? She looked shaken. That night, Julia and I sat on opposite sides of the bed. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, she sighed. I never thought he'd really turn his back on her like that. I turned to look at her. Really? Because I did. She didn't argue. She just rubbed her temples, looking exhausted. I thought I was protecting her. I thought, if I kept the peace, things would eventually get better. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. No, Julia, you weren't protecting her. You were enabling her. She flinched. I sighed. She had a choice. She could have had a father who actually cared about her. She could have had a man who never left, who paid for everything, who showed up, but she chose to spit on that. Julia's voice was barely above a whisper. Because I let her. I didn't say anything, because she was right. Julia had always excused Ava's behavior. She defended her, shielded her, softened the consequences, and now, her daughter was completely alone. And this time, Julia couldn't fix it. Tears welled up in her eyes. I should have stopped her. I exhaled slowly. Yeah, you should have. Julia wiped her face and finally looked at me. You were right to cut her off. For the first time in our entire marriage, Julia finally saw it. And for the first time, she wasn't standing in the way. Over the next few weeks, Ava spiraled. Her landlord sent an eviction warning. She begged her friends for money. They ghosted her. Her old job wouldn't take her back. She was broke, abandoned, and completely out of options. And finally, she cracked. One evening, I was working in my office when I heard a soft knock on the door. I already knew who it was. I opened it to find Ava standing there, looking like a shadow of the girl she once was. Her face was pale. Her eyes were puffy from crying. She looked smaller, weaker, like reality had finally broken her. She swallowed hard. Can we talk? I leaned against the doorframe. Talk about what? She hesitated. Then, in a voice I had never heard from her before, soft, shaking, almost childlike, she whispered, I'm sorry. Ava took a deep breath, struggling to find the words. I didn't mean what I said before. I was stupid. I was selfish. I took you for granted. I stayed silent. You were always there for me. You showed up. You paid for everything. You treated me like a real dad. Her voice cracked. And I treated you like nothing. She looked down, ashamed. I was wrong, and now I don't know what to do. Then she looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. Please, I need help. I took a long breath, staring at her. For the first time in years, Ava was truly vulnerable. No fake bravado, no entitlement, just pure, raw desperation. But me, I wasn't desperate. I had already moved on. I sighed. Ava, do you know what a wallet does when it's empty? She blinked, confused. I took a slow breath. It closes. Then I shut the door in her face, and this time, I didn't pick up when she called again. Ava never called again after that night. At least, not from her number. A week later, Julia's phone rang while we were having dinner. She glanced at the screen, her expression tightening. It's Ava? I kept eating. You gonna answer? Julia hesitated. Then, for the first time in her life, she let it ring. And that was when I knew she had finally let go. A few days later, I got an email from Ava. I know you probably won't read this, but I miss you. I was stupid. I see that now. I lost everything, and it's all my fault. I don't know what to do. Please just talk to me. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then, I deleted it. No response. No closure. Nothing. Because sometimes the best revenge is simply moving on. What happened to Ava? She lost her apartment. She had to move into a tiny shared rental with 2 strangers. She worked a minimum wage job. She finally understood what it felt like to have nothing. And me, I still had my home. I still had my career. I still had my wife. And the best part, I never had to hear Ava's voice again.